wonderful, or the next version of AI is going to be terrible. And I think we need more nuanced approach. There are wonderful things we can grasp if we are wise, but if we are careless, we will stumble into terrible risks, cataclysms. So we need a more balanced view. We can't solve this just by pointing to the risks or by pointing to the benefits. We need to map things out a lot more carefully.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much, and keep up the great work.
I'll keep up your great work too, Richard.
Thank you very much, David. We are 58 of us and rising by the moment, which is wonderful for a school holiday event that we're on in July here. It's wonderful to see so many friendly faces and some new faces as well. I was just saying, do pop in the chat where you're joining us from today. It's really wonderful to see what kind of coverage and representation we've got from around the globe or beyond, if anybody's on the space station, perhaps. And today we've got a couple of hours of very interesting dialogue, hopefully, and discourse. Welcome, Robert. Welcome, Tony. Welcome, Pratap. Welcome, Jeremy, James. Welcome, Mel. Welcome, Frederick, as well. I see some cameras on. Everyone's looking great today. So must be a good day. And so we're back. I think, according to LinkedIn, we've done 78 events or forums and things now in MKAI. So I know what you're thinking. We should be getting good at this by now. But I think we like to disrupt ourselves. So for those who haven't been before, this is our monthly get-together. We call these our forums. We host them on regular Zoom, as you can tell, because we're very much about standing shoulder to shoulder with each other and having a dialogue and an understanding of the world around us that is not based on a few people on a pedestal, but in fact, on all of us bringing in the smaller, larger amounts that we know about these particular areas, because ultimately, when we get into conversations like this, it doesn't really make sense when you have a conversation just about a technology or just about a certain area. We know that it's the convergence. It's where AI meets society and sustainability and ethics and inclusion and equity and so on, that we start to get the bigger picture and the understanding of what these mega trends are doing and where they're going and how they influence us. We want to come away with a greater sense of curiosity, a greater sense of inclusion and understanding. We're not here for answers, but we're here very much to expand, ask better questions, and respect the way that each of us sees the world, our own lens, our own perspective, our own diversity, and being a space where we celebrate that. The motto of MKAI is that our diversity is our strength, and we live and breathe that every single day, we hope anyway. But we've got things to do as well, so don't be shy in the chat, and why not pop in who you are and what you do on your LinkedIn, your URL perhaps. I think most of us probably are on LinkedIn, given where we spend our time and where we find our community, so we can go and sort of discover other people and like-minded people that we may want to collaborate with as a group here. So please don't be shy, put that in, and then we'll be able to connect with you on LinkedIn and keep conversations going. We have a wonderful WhatsApp group as well, and I'll ask one of the team if they can grab that URL and pop it in as well. Given that we change it so much, it might be sensible for me to grab it live now. So we'll be having a conversation today, but it doesn't stop. So why not, if you're not already a member, come along and join the discourse and dialogue that we have on WhatsApp. It's very much the same kind of energy, safe space, open space, very inclusive space, but a challenging space as well. At MKAI, we don't really have any paymasters of that sense. So whilst we operate with gentle, curious kindness, we're not scared to go places that we need to. I'll even update my name here, so that's it's moved away from Team MKAI. So come along to that chat. Marcus is next to me here on the screen. Marcus, what would you say about the chat? Maybe just encourage some folks to come in and join us who don't already participate.
Yeah, everyone should join in, share your insights, share some of the links. Sorry.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
Share some of the links you've come across, exchange the information. I also think you are saving that chat down later, so it'll become available for people together with the YouTube recording through the LinkedIn and the WhatsApp group. So it's nice as a reference to go back. I tend to save it down myself, but it's great having that collection of materials and thoughts at the point in time. Don't be shy. Share your ideas and thinking.
Yeah, absolutely. So very, very welcome. And whilst we have a lot of activity in that group, Karen, who may or may not be here yet from the team, she actually creates a daily summary so that you can actually keep up with the latest and greatest insights and unique avenues of understanding in AI and its convergence with sustainability, society, business, and so on, excuse me, in about 30 seconds a day, which I think is a pretty cool thing. We don't charge, so it's really a space for us all to grow and benefit together. So I won't say any more about that. I think if you're up for it, we'll see you. If you're not, it's no problem at all. Maybe next time. So let's jump in. We'll keep an eye on microphones today if anybody forgets, and just make sure we try and have a quiet space to hear and learn together. Please do keep your cameras on. It's wonderful to see you. We'll highlight some of our invited contributors towards the start of this meeting, and then probably just come back to our main screen as well later on. So we won't close the session at 6 UK, so it's 4 UK now. We won't close it at 6. We'll have had time to hear from the prepared comments of those who have joined us today from the invited contributors, but we won't close. So we very much want to hear your thoughts, and we'll close the meeting only when everybody's really had a chance to digest, share, and contribute to a discussion. As always, recorded. Hey, Kat, good to see you. Hey, Robert, good to see you. Hey, Yana as well, great to see you. Excuse me. So we'll be recording today, and it'll be up on the website, mkai.org. Just go over to that. I think it's on the right, resources, event archive. It'll be up tomorrow-ish or even later tonight. Now I've got a better computer. It doesn't take 4 hours anymore to download it. So finally, just all hugely welcome again. It really is the highlight of my month to be here and to share in this wonderful, welcoming, kind space with everybody. Let's start the show, and let's see where we can go in 1 hour and 54 minutes today. So there was this leaked memo some time ago from Google that said our greatest competitor is not OpenAI or any others, it's open source. And that was where they really felt that the great power and prowess in large language models and generative AI were coming in. So we thought we'd pick that baton up and look into the avenues around what does it mean to be using proprietary AI for generative AI? What does it mean from a business perspective, from a privacy, sovereignty, ethical perspective, security, with the lens of us being operationally effective, using these tools well, but understanding the bigger picture and the implications of what we're doing as far as one can. I think we're all going to be learning together here today and contributing. Why use something over something else? So that's where we want to navigate. So quite a practical session, hopefully today, or at least to start with. We want there to be some clear takeaways that people can apply fairly quickly in their work. But we, of course, we wouldn't be MKAI if we didn't zoom out. Hey, Johanna, great to see you. Just pop that on mute. We wouldn't be MKAI if we didn't zoom out. And we know we're going to get into some of this ethical stuff in more detail today. We know we're going to begin looking at the big picture. We've already heard from David Wood already, so we know that we love to get into these conversations. So a huge welcome. I'm joined with some colleagues as well to help run this show today. So Paul's here. We'll spotlight in a second. Paul, great to see you.
Good to see you as well. I am mostly muting Richard because I have seagulls flying over in vast numbers. I'm not quite sure what they're fleeing from. Probably, hopefully not this meeting.
Well, it's good to see you, Paul. So Paul's going to be my co-conspirator, the animateur, we call him, injecting energy and life into our event today. Paul, in your own words, how would you describe your role and why is it important today?
I think we sometimes say we want to light the fire under the conversation. We'd like to encourage people to really use the chat here. And if you want to get specific, you can. The bar we set for our meetings is that you don't go away going, well, that was interesting, but I could have got all of that off LinkedIn. You know, we're wanting to become nuanced. We're wanting to deep dive a bit. We want to hear people's specific stories. I totally echo what David Wood said. For those of you that weren't in earlier, David pointed out how important it is for us to grasp the present, but how limited it is to only grasp the present, because it's actually ChatGPT 5, 6 and beyond that we need to think about. And when we future, we inform the present as well. So we're not just looking at now, we're going to look up ahead, hopefully, as well.
Don't look up. Thanks, Paul. Yeah, absolutely. We want this to be something that you wouldn't just be able to read in 5 minutes on LinkedIn. So welcome, Jaisal. Jaisal is going to be monitoring the chat very closely today and contributing those questions into the dialogue as well. Jaisal, you're very welcome.
Hello, everyone. I'm
We
looking
find-
forward to the forum. Absolutely. I'm going to look closely to the chat for any questions that we have for the panelists.
Excellent. Keep us on track, stay close, and make sure that we've got an inclusive dialogue. So yeah, absolutely, please do use the chat. Jason will be reading it and pulling out those questions for us as well. Jerry, welcome as well. You've played a huge part in putting this together, actually, Jerry, this month, haven't you?
I have. And for fans of live broadcasts and television, we're trying a slightly different format this time in terms of introductions. So things could go wrong for those of you that watch live television and live broadcasts, in the hope that will happen. But let's go. Let's see what happens.
Wonderful. Well, with that in mind, do you want to mention who's on our screen, and then we'll jump into this spotlighted conversation fairly quickly?
Okay, so let me look at who's on our screen. Right. So shall I introduce everybody then?
I think so. Yeah, please do. Yeah.
Right. So hi, as you for those of you with a memory, I'm Jerry. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome panelists, members of MKAI's global family, MKAI champions, Minds members and guests wherever you are. Friends, we hope we put together another fascinating, insightful and impactful event for you. We really hope you enjoy it. Joining us in MKAI's global lounge, we have what we believe to be a truly incredible lineup of distinguished panelists for you from the UK, Ghana, and currently India, all of whom feature on the MKAI global list of our favorite people. So, joining us from the UK, our first panelist is a technology innovation leader, expert speaker, an independent consultant focused on emerging technologies like generative AI and Web3, as well as open innovation. She's a track record of delivering large-scale multi-million user digital propositions like the BBC's EU referendum service results across all editions of the BBC News website, and early-stage prototypes for Sky Glass. Passionate about ethical and responsible AI, she served as an expert advisor during Sky's work with the European Commission on AI legislation. She also founded Sky's Metaverse Network and established a technology innovation function for Sky's Innovation Lab. She has an MSc in Creative Technologies from De Montfort and fresh from London's AI Summit's Technology Week, where she spoke on business and AI in the metaverse. Please welcome and enjoy the remarkable Melanie Moller.
Thank you, everyone. And well done, Jerry, for reading out my entire bio.
Thank you very much. Very super grateful.
You're gonna need a glass of water after this, Jerry.
or two or three.
Or something else.
So we're now enormously proud to introduce our next panelist. He also joins us from the UK. He's a member of Softwire's executive board and brings over a decade of leadership experience in the technology sector to our Inclusive AI Forum. As a client portfolio director, he currently steers a diverse team of more than 80 professionals to transform business aspirations into successful digital outcomes across sectors such as media and entertainment, leisure and retail. Having led a variety of roles from business development executive to head of sales, he's consistently driven Softwire's commercial growth and brand recognition, managing and mentoring teams to creating successful business outcomes for clients and fostering strong business relationships. In his current position, as well as overseeing the strategic portfolio, his responsibilities also include leading the organization's go-to-market strategy for specific industry sectors and technical domains. Recently, he's had a particular focus on generative AI and is responsible for driving Softwire's generative AI consultancy service. Please welcome our distinguished guest, Yemi Olagbayi.
Thank you. And you pronounced my surname correctly, so well done. Nice.
Wow, just luck and a little practice. Thank you.
Big breath and
joining us from Mumbai, India, our next guest is a philosopher and researcher specializing in consciousness science. Wow, artificial intelligence and aesthetics. She's an MPhil researcher at the University of Cambridge, affiliated with the Leverhulme Centre for the Future of Intelligence. She also provides consulting on the future of AI with regard to AI sentience, creative intelligence in generative models, and the ethics of AI. Her current work focuses on explaining how encoding suffering in artificial intelligence could be a step towards phenomenology and creating representations in deep learning frameworks that could potentially have subjective experiences. She's the convener of the Kinds of Intelligence Reading Group with Dr. Henry Shevlin at the Leverhulme Centre for the Future of Intelligence, wherein individuals from several disciplines come together to discuss topics like artificial intelligence, consciousness, neuroscience, and philosophy. Please extend a warm MKAI family welcome to Vija Mehta.
Hello, thank you. I think you did a great job with that really long bio as well.
This will all go to my head. I might wind up doing this regularly if you're not careful. Last but not least, our final wonderful panelist joins us from Ghana. He's based in Greater Accra, which does suffer from occasional connectivity issues, so please bear with him.
Yes, we haven't seen him just yet, but in anticipation.
Shall we
pause
wait for a
until
while?
he comes, because then he can get to hear your wonderful introduction as well. So we're waiting on Reginald, but as you say, connectivity can be a challenge. But do give me a wave, Reginald, if you're here under perhaps different guise or a different name we haven't spotted yet. So wonderful, Jerry, thank you so much. We're certainly in amazing company today. We know this is an important topic. 135 of us, it was changing as I said that in the room here. Let's make the most of this time. Let's really contribute together on such important topics. Paul, we need your help though, in terms of, we've got 1 hour, 44 minutes on the clock. What can we feasibly achieve today? What do we want? What are our objectives here? What do we want to get to, not get to? What's going to keep us on course to have a very successful time together today?
Well, we've clearly set up, hopefully to provoke conversation, a binary title that says, is it open source or is it not open source? That is the question. Is it proprietary? And of course, it's not either or. So part of this question is to find out what's in that middle space. What are the essential risks and differences, but also what alternative models exist that are not on that binary line. And that's what we're hoping is going to come out of this conversation. I think we want to have an uncomfortable one. I think we're going to challenge the idea that open source is all good. But I think we'll equally challenge the idea that proprietary systems are somehow safer and also all good. So let's see if we can come out a bit more clued up and a bit more, I guess devil is in the detail, but we'll get a bit of detail and a bit of philosophy as well, by the sound of it.
I think we definitely will. Okay. We probably need to just shape the market a little bit here in terms of what we're talking about. I suppose most folks on this call will know some of the large proprietary players. But what are we actually comparing here? Melanie, and perhaps you want to help us to get started on this. What is the landscape as you see it? And what even are the options in this space for somebody running a business or, on their upwards in their career? Melanie, can you kick us off?
Yeah, sure, definitely. So there's a vast amount of options that, most of us are aware of. But as a business and as part of my, 13 years career working in technology, I've worked with a lot of businesses, small and large. We should really be asking ourselves, what are we choosing a solution for? And I think here the key factors to consider for businesses, because I want to keep this tangible, everything else you can, kind of like Google, but I really want to share my experience, is, what's the degree of customization and flexibility a business needs, first of all? How much do you need to be able to customize the solution, but also need to have ownership of the data that go into the system or into the model? Obviously, a lot of businesses, like I've been, working a lot with large businesses, and they freaked out when all of a sudden ChatGPT came around and became, as we all know, a big thing, and they saw their employees, having their emails open and then having ChatGPT here and putting all sorts of company information into ChatGPT's just general sort of instance, including, from what I've seen, customer details, customer, IDs and numbers. That is obviously you know, a bit concerning. So I think it's really important for companies to have the right knowledge around these two solutions. The other thing is obviously community support and professional support. You know, when you have an open source community, open source is great because there is a community around it. It's great because you can experiment. So, and in a certain way, you know, there's self-regulation in that because it's not owned by one company, for example, but you have many different contributors. You know, there's obviously a question then around ongoing maintenance. When you use proprietary solutions, either in-house or you work with a third party and you pay for, you license their solutions, then obviously as a business, you pay for ongoing support. There's also something around intellectual property and licensing. So how is that, whatever solution you choose to use, impacting your organization's IP rights? And then there's something around quality and reliability. So especially if you're using large language models, let's say in your customer service, as an example use case, you do not want your service to be down because your customers might have crucial inquiries and they need to be able to use your service. So you need to make sure that any risk is being mitigated and that the solution is reliable and can be accessed at all times. There's obviously security and risk management. So we talked about how data is being handled and secured already, but also what about any vulnerabilities associated? And then finally, time to market and cost. So the businesses I have worked with, you know, I would always get them to consider what is it you want to achieve, you know, what's the budget? And then obviously the quicker businesses, the faster businesses can get a solution to market, the faster they can start experimenting and learning. So a lot of times it actually, especially with the vast amount of solutions out there, doesn't make any sense to build things in-house, or even for a lot of companies to hire a large fleet of data scientists. A lot of times they just need an MLOps engineer, for example, to wire in different solutions and then test the outputs. So I think those are just, you know, a few factors I would, you know, encourage businesses to consider as they choose between open source and proprietary solutions.
Can I just come in on that, Melanie? Just for everybody who's in this Zoom today, can I just ask everybody that doesn't mind sharing this? On the device that you're currently using to access this Zoom call, can you just type in the chat what operating system you are using? So it will probably be Windows, it will be Mac OS, it might be Linux, there might be some other one that you'll use. But here we go, Windows, iOS, Windows. We've got one Linux there from Matthew. OS, Windows. There we can see Melody. Perhaps we don't seem surprised when we look at that. And yet the statistics are controversial, but there's one statistic that of the US Fortune 500 companies, about over 80% use Linux on their main business systems. We know that, of course, Google do, and we know that Facebook do, and so on. Linux, open source, Linux, GNU, a mix of open source and free. What do they know that the rest of us don't as we start paying every month for an upgrade?
Sorry, is that question directed
Yeah, well, I guess so. Yeah, what is it that, you know, we're talking about open source. All the large companies pretty much are using Linux. The rest of us seem saddled with proprietary systems. What do they know that we don't?
That's a good question. I mean, I don't really use Linux, to be honest. I also don't think so, you know, for the past 5.5 years, I've been working for Sky, and I'm not really aware of anyone using Linux there. So everyone is either on iOS or on Windows. And I think it also depends on the company guidelines. I don't know, anyone has got some insight who's a Linux user into why that is?
I'm just interested, just while you're doing that, you know, what we have is Linux in most of its forms, and the reason given by most large corporations, cost effective, you know, they feel safer with it. They're not tied to proprietary systems. They don't feel locked down. there's a whole bunch of reasons why companies claim to use Linux, and it is a significant number. I'm wondering if ultimately the starting point for this conversation is that open source is, particularly when it's connected to low cost, is a very inconvenient model for the suppliers of operating systems, AI tools, and so on.
I think
Yeah,
there's also,
sorry, go on.
I think an operating system, I guess, is one thing, but then a generative AI system is another thing, you know, where obviously there's a number of dimensions we really need to consider, such as things like, especially around ethical concerns, you know, such as like transparency, human oversight, responsible use, trustworthiness, accountability. Because obviously, yeah, there's risk with an operating system as well. But as we, you know, are all aware of, generative AI systems, they generate new content. And also, especially when we get into the realm of autonomous agents and self-evolving models, I think there can be like a great risk if that's not monitored. So when we think about open source, obviously there's a whole community around it, but how is this risk being managed and mitigated? When we think about proprietary, obviously within the EU, we see now a piece of legislation to try to regulate AI, which I think is really exciting because that puts different asks at least at enterprises who use AI systems. And I'm really specifically excited around the notion of, you know, creating AI regulatory sandboxes, for example. So I think that that's really good when we think about the enforcement of quality, of security, having an even sort of playing field. Obviously, that's lacking in the UK. The UK is still a bit of a Wild West with regards to that. I don't know if, you know, people from other countries, I think, didn't we say we have got someone dialing in from Ghana? Would be really great to hear what the regulatory landscape looks like there. But yeah, just a few.
I mean, I guess I think you've raised some really important issues, and the chat has gone mad on this as we've got a battle going on of operating systems. Yemi, I know you were going to come in, so maybe also you might want to speak, but I just wanted to quote to everybody figures from March 2023. Google, Facebook, Amazon, IBM, Intel, Hewlett-Packard, Dell, the list can go on, all fundamentally use Linux as their core commercial operating system. And I guess the reason I'm asking that, you might think, what are we talking about that on an AI conversation? It's simply, we're also talking about open source. These are very, very large corporations influencing most of our lives. And so I'm still asking the same question. What do they know that we don't about the commercial potential, the safety, you know, lots of other issues around free systems, open source systems, systems that use open innovation where we can control the code rather than proprietary ones that can be as closed as OS, where you have very little control over look and feel, but people are still tied into it. What's going on here at the heart of this?
So I'm not sure if this answers your question, Paul, but I guess I was sort of sat trying to formulate this thought while Melanie was speaking. I think she touched on this slightly, in that there are many different vectors, many different angles through which a company decides to make that decision, whether it be which operating system that they're using, or whether it be which generative AI solution or sort of framework that they decide to go in. So when we look at the operating system side of things, yes, there are those considerations, like you mentioned, of sort of the cost effectiveness, I think you said, the safety, and the customizability, all of those sorts of things. Perhaps, I don't know, this is just my own personal opinion, I think there is a different set of considerations when you look at that through the lens of generative AI. And when I think to myself, so obviously my company, what we do is we're advising enterprise organizations in how to adopt generative AI into their business. And I think the conversation that I more often find is that the main problem with those open source alternatives to GPT sort of base models is that they're developed mainly as research projects, right? So their intended users are other researchers, academics, and hobbyists in the natural language processing, machine learning sort of world, rather than necessarily, I'm not saying exclusively, but rather than necessarily commercial users. So I'm not saying that this research doesn't, I guess, contribute, you know, at large to the development of you know, generative AI as a field. But I think that there is some limitation when you're talking about trying to incorporate this stuff into an enterprise environment, because fundamentally and unfortunately, the most powerful models that exist at the moment are those proprietary models. And I guess that's something that the companies have to wrestle with in terms of their considerations of what they're looking to get out of a generative AI solution.
So coming right to the other extreme, almost like the geeky specifics, if I'm a small business, we have a marketing department or medium-sized business, and we pay agencies quite a lot for our advertising copy. And we've been hearing that our competitors are now generating leads more effectively than us. And they're using generative AI to put posts out every day and so on. And on the table are two tools. One of them is, going to be a few £100 a month for the premium subscription service to use it. It's got good reviews and it promises a bunch of, responsible behavior because we're paying for it and so on. There's a contract. But there's another tool that's getting rave reviews all over the internet too. And that damn one is free and open source. Is the no-brainer that we need to pay a few £100 a month, Yemi?
I wouldn't.
I don't go.
Oops, someone's speaking. Sorry. I wouldn't say it's a no-brainer because, like I said, there are a multitude of different considerations there. The cost is just one of many factors. There is also, as I'm sure we'll come on to later on in today's conversation, there is also the angle of the data privacy and the security and the differences that you get between using something like OpenAI versus one of those open source things. There is also, I guess, the technical expertise and how easy it is to teach your staff, your employees, how to effectively use one version or the other. So I think we can't simplify it down to this one costs more and is getting more results, and so that's the no-brainer, because there are other considerations that you're going to take as a business that feed into that decision.
I think I'm going to push harder though, because those things are all over LinkedIn. And have we been 20 years ago talking about which tech do we buy, the free one? We'd have said that. We'd have talked about privacy and risk and all those things. Is it just those things? A bit of research for this. I spoke to a couple of digital businesses in Brighton in the UK, where I am, quite a digital city. One of them is generating all of their marketing material quite merrily, thank you very much, using Hugging Face. The other one has paid for ChatGPT-4. Both said fine, no issues. What's the difference?
It's a good question. A question I to be honest with you, I don't have the answer for at the moment. But I guess to take it on a slight tangent, the tools are only one part, in terms of, because you're talking about the outcomes, right? People are getting some rave results out of using one thing versus the other. One's more expensive than the other. The one thing I will say that doesn't answer your question, but I think is a valid point worth making, is that the tool is only one part of the equation. I like to think of these things as augmented intelligence rather than the term artificial intelligence that we're using. Augmented because you still have to have a human behind that process that is able to know how to effectively use that tool, whether it's the most expensive tool out there in the market or a really sort of cheap, rough and ready tool. There are still human skills, human inputs that enable you to get good outputs out of that. Those human skills including the creativity to understand the right questions to be asking that tool. Those human skills including the attention to detail to understand, okay, well, do I need to cross-check the suggestions made and the accuracy of or the logic tightness of what's coming out, and the human skill of having the creative analysis, analytical thinking, should we say, to take a step back once you've seen those outputs and to analyze whether they are suitable, whether they are appropriate for your needs. So yes, there are some tools out there that are going to be more expensive, and I'm sure people will get rave reviews out of there, but that is only one part of the equation. This is augmented intelligence that is supposed to be augmenting fundamental human skill, human knowledge, which is still going to be the major asset in kind of leveraging these tools. And you have to bear those two things in mind. It's not as simple as saying there is a really, pricey premium tool out there that people are getting results out of, and it's as simple as, right, well, let's just buy that tool. If you've got people that don't know how to use it effectively, you are not going to get the same results.
And I guess, go ahead, Melanie.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Yemi. I think it's also really important to distinguish between LLMs and AI SaaS solutions, which we are seeing, emerging a lot. And Hugging Face is essentially a SaaS solution that makes it really easy to pull in different models to set up your infrastructure. That doesn't just, provide you access to like one LLM that they update, every once in a while, whatever, but it provides you access to different models, data sets, and so on and so forth. So it's a sort of like end-to-end, quite flexible solution. And I think there's a lot of power and opportunity in that if a company can use a service like Hugging Face, and they can do their audio classification, their image classification, object detection, question answering, and so on and so forth.
Okay. Who else wants to come in from the panel?
I mean, I agree with Yemi when it comes to this. Like he was talking about how there's a human element involved in the creation of new information from generative AI. I think the basis of generative AI is a collab between humans and AI. Well, the systems we have right now, at least, the large language models and generative AI like the DALL-E 2, which is OpenAI's, it's a closed source system. And then when I talk about systems like Stable Diffusion and Midjourney, which are open source. So when we talk about, SMEs sort of using these sort of systems for marketing and innovation services, or even when we talk about artists as businesses, maybe there are a lot of artists who create digital art with the means of using these AI systems. I think not long ago, there was an artist who won the Colorado State Fair by using Midjourney. And this was a human and AI collab, which, ended up really blowing up. And that's when the whole generative AI in the art world really took off, when people really started talking about it. And then this is an important thing, talking about how there is such a big human element in this. So if we talk about sort of artists as businesses or SMEs having to use either the open source or closed source AI systems, what would be better for them? I think, again, this goes back to the start where, the tasks that they really want to employ, the tasks that they want to carry out really play a really big part in this. If it's, simple tasks like creating small sort of text to image prompts and then giving an output which can be used for marketing purposes or social media, then, I mean, like open source would be cheaper for SME to use, I think, but when we talk about artists, really the question of authenticity comes into picture, and then copyright issues, safety, privacy. And with these things, I think some artists do prefer to use proprietary AI. But for example, if I just compare these very famous two models, the DALL-E 2 and Stable Diffusion, I think in the art community, or people who just, again, like playing around with it, I think Yemi mentioned this before about how the open source sort of systems like Stable Diffusion or any of the other ones have been a lot more for researchers and academics to play around, to understand how the systems work. And I think for me as a researcher, an academic who wants to understand, obviously I've been researching on creative intelligence. And so when I play around with these systems, you do tend to understand a lot more from a system like Stable Diffusion and less from the DALL-E. And there are simple things about how the DALL-E has a lot more filters on than Stable Diffusion. I think you can create a lot more, like you have this variety, like a plethora of things you could create with Stable Diffusion or Midjourney. But with the DALL-E, there are a lot of limitations. And then again, with these things, the questions of, what is the main task for the user? I think they would, again, be the deciding factor. What would be better for them? I don't think there's like a particular right answer.
So just to I'll come back to you on that. There's some great chat going on. And so just to kind of summarize some of what is going on in the conversation alongside this. Of course, it's silly of me and unfair of me to be comparing very large corporations with typical businesses. Absolutely right. I just find it interesting that large corporations, because as is mentioned, because they've got the money to refine and develop these open source systems and adapt them to their use, are often using open source and not using proprietary systems, big household names, even as those very companies are selling proprietary products. to us. So it's just an interesting kind of bigger picture thing going on around innovation and access and so on. Then we've got some really important comments. Of course, it's not only about cost. You know, if cost is the driver, we're using it because it's free. You may stumble very quickly in the world of generative AI. But I just find it interesting that in my city, a lot of people are using that. Definitely. We're hearing that proprietary products are sometimes, you know, offering, say, more filters, more stuff than the others. We've got lots of other issues. One about interchangeability, that in the open source world, it might be easier to shift between one app and another. The coding is easier to get into. With proprietary stuff, as in Apple, products are created that may be designed to block you from taking that content elsewhere and may lock you down, as Jaron Lanier would say, you know, into systems for a long time, which may not be what you want if you're in a very creative space like, you know, artists and so on. You might want to have that freedom. So there's an issue around creative freedom. I was just coming back, Divya, around if that's the case, then do you think, I mean, it's a general thing, that there is evidence specifically in the field of generative AI that open source, which is often the home of open innovation, is that generating more, better and different innovation to traditional R&D models behind the firewall of proprietary providers?
Right. I think you cut off a bit in the end, but I think I understand the general question here. So with the open source networks, models, I think a lot of people have claimed that they're easier to train with your own data, with artists or people trying to use these models for innovation. It's easier for them to train the model on their pre-existing data, or like an example, a very simple example, someone wants a painting that has to be created in the same style as a particular artist. So you train a model on these images and it gives you something new based on the prompt as to what you're looking for. So for a business that wants to create a commercial, I think the new Coca-Cola commercial was also AI generated. So they would obviously put like pre-existing data in it and train it in order to create this, use the creative intelligence of the system and create something new. So I think people who may not have the technical expertise, may not really know how to go about this. A lot of people have been using systems like Midjourney and Stable Diffusion in order to train the model on their own data and create something based on that for an output. And this again comes down to the question of authenticity, where artists, people who want to create such things, rely heavily on sort of their sort of style of creativity. And this can be replicated only if this model is trained particularly on their data. And I mean, of course, proprietary AI can also do the same things. You could, use GPT-4 to do similar things. But in the community, as far as I have been hearing from others, this is, open source is easier to work with. But then with questions of all of this easily available to the public, this brings around like a lot of more difficulty and more questions.
Yeah, and I guess I looked into it myself as an academic researcher, and I can't find any kind of decent data that shows that the large brands that are using generative AI to create advertising campaigns, whether they're using open source apps or whether they're using proprietary ones. There's a lot of anecdotal conversation around that.
I mean, I'm not 100% sure about the source, but I think I read somewhere the new Coca-Cola AI commercial, I think it used proprietary AI to create the new commercial. Now, again, I am assuming this is because obviously it is a very, very big enterprise who wants to keep its data sort of secure, and for privacy reasons and copyright reason, it may have gone for the proprietary option. But if anyone knows anything otherwise, I would be really happy to learn more about this.
Be interesting to bring. We've got Alex Monaghan. You've got your camera on.
Yeah, no, I invited Alex to join the conversation.
Alex, what do you think?
Alex, can you just tell us who you are as well? Because I've invited you into this space. So thank you for being here.
Yeah, sorry, my spacebar stopped working. So I have been in AI for about 40 years, longer than most of you, I'm guessing.
I would have to have
changed a lot
young.
in that time. I've been working more recently in contact center systems, payment systems, human-facing systems, generally speaking, as a consultant in sort of technical sales type areas, and seeing the rise of both internally and externally people using AI for all sorts of things, but also now particularly quickly and in many cases blindly using generative AI. And I was just going to comment, Paul, I think it's maybe worth distinguishing three classes of use here. So the sort of tool use, where the only person who's really affected by the output is the user, is absolutely a good case to talk about. And sorry, is it Via was talking about that case. I've been seeing much more the customer facing use of AI, either in contact centers or in marketing campaigns, as was just mentioned, you know, where what matters is the reaction of the humans to the output. And that obviously brings all sorts of litigation problems. There have been some highly publicized cases where it hasn't gone well. I'm sure lots of cases we don't know about where it has gone well. And then in the third case, I would say you're talking about business critical applications of this, where it's something that doesn't directly produce an output that is consumed by a human, but things like mortgage decisions, loan decisions, insurance premium decisions, which are affecting potentially millions of people. We don't see the direct output from that system, but that system has a massive effect and a huge risk for a business if it gets it wrong. And I think if we think about those three different classes, very obviously open source is great for artists, but much less so for insurance companies. And the thing that worries me is the number of people in that space in between, particularly the customer facing space, marketing, for instance. I like to pick on marketers, everybody picks on marketing, but marketing is not technical, generally speaking, and yet they're using these technologies to push things to humans where really they don't know what they're going to get, and there's very little oversight in some cases. So that's what I would see as a general picture.
Yeah, but getting a bit more specific with your 40 years of experience as well, and also your background in customer experience and that kind of stuff too. So let's get specific around generative AI. Some of the criticisms or dangers of going for proprietary strategies. One is vendor lock-in, the classic one, that, you know, it may well be that if we make certain decisions, we will regret it because, for example, you know, in generative AI, you have things like hyperparameters being shared in the open source community where we can identify certain code that gets shared across all of them. In proprietary, there's a danger there are kind of protective walls up, and that will stifle innovation and freedom from a user perspective.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I agree with you, and you want to have that freedom, and generally speaking, people don't have it in, you know, whatever it is, whether it's a feature that you want in Word, or it's you know, a function that you want in Excel, or whether it's something in generative AI that you can't get from your proprietary vendor. The difference for me is that that proprietary vendor has a process where you can submit a request. That request goes to experts who know how the system was built. Those experts are presumably able to advise you on how to use it, to tell you when it'll be available, to tell you what the risks are, to minimize those risks. Whereas if you go with open source and you decide to build something, you've got no expertise, nobody else has got any expertise. If it goes wrong, what do? You know, do you throw it away? Do you keep using it? Do you even know that it's gone wrong? Unless you have a body of people in your organization who are experienced and monitoring and able to fix things, then you're not at the mercy of the supplier. You're at the mercy of chance, and I think that's probably worse.
But just one last thing before we open it out to challenge back, and this is picking up David Wood's comment about looking beyond, is actually, you know, that set up maybe a false premise that's based on the way things worked in the past. Ultimately, the huge amount of kind of niche development that's going on in open sourcing is, you know, we will have help from generative AI. AI will come to our rescue. The innovation machine of open source will say when things go wrong, when we get difficult things, we'll be able to transfer out of that tool into a safe staging platform. We'll have the freedom to actually prevent problems ever occurring again, rather than waiting on the call center for the premium helpline, you know, at 2 o'clock in the morning, wondering when we're going to get through to somebody.
Yeah, it's a nice idea, but it hasn't happened in self-driving cars yet, for instance, and they've been around a long time. There's been a lot of investment in them, and we haven't got to the point where there are people there who can stop the problems and make sure that you've got a safe place that you can, you know, park your robo-taxi until it's fixed. That just isn't the way the business seems to work at the moment. I think that we could well end up with huge open source communities the way we have for Python or Java or whatever, but we're a long way from that yet. You know, nobody has developed that for ChatGPT or GPT-4 or any of these things, simply because the timescale isn't there. 10, 20 years down the road, absolutely, Paul.
Okay, but there it is. The idea is the open source community is quite soon, in the scheme of things, going to largely be curated by AI itself.
Yeah, I'm not convinced of that. I'm not sure we'll ever get.
It was worth a try. It was worth a try. Yemi, how about you? What, you're listening to this? What's some of your thoughts?
So I'm gonna say something slightly different here. I mean, because in terms of this, the argument that you just made there, Alex, of you know, well, actually, you can use these proprietary things, and they've thought about a lot of this stuff for you, right? There, and there is almost like a you know, a culpability and accountability, sorry, is the word I'm looking for, right? That you can pass on to these. But it then got me thinking about OpenAI and Sam Altman, and kind of, because he's all over my LinkedIn feed and my sort of Google News feed and everything at the minute. The issue with me is that AI, it's like the term algorithm, right? And we watch companies use algorithms and now AI as a means of evading responsibility for their actions, right? So if we are to, for the purposes of this argument, if we are to entertain the view that AI is all powerful, you know, we're endorsing the view that it can alleviate people of responsibility for their actions. So I think the biggest danger of some of this, I find, is that you know, there's an interesting article that I read recently, and I don't mean to sort of slander Sam Altman, but it said, look, the thing with OpenAI is that it's basically one giant sales pitch, right? Like, now that there's this private company, and they have the greatest sales pitch in the world, which is essentially, this is a really dangerous thing, guys, so maybe we shouldn't put it out there. And so now everyone wants it, right? That doesn't mean that there isn't a real danger here, because I feel that there actually is. But I personally, and this is just my opinion, I think that I identify the danger as an abdication of responsibility. You know, we've seen Sam Altman sort of come up and say, I think I posted something about this recently, saying, you know, we need more regulation, we need a governing body for all of this stuff. You know, and you guys, the governments and the international communities and whatnot, you guys are the ones that need to do that. But that's like surely one of the oldest political tricks in the book of tech companies, right? Like Zuckerberg's been asking to be regulated for years, and where has that got us? So I don't know. I think there's a bit of a concern, contrary to other opinions that I put forward in this so far, that handing so much over to these proprietary companies is kind of further funneling us down into this world where actually it could kind of potentially go very wrong. I don't know.
Yeah, and on that then, Yemi, I mean, it's quite interesting. OpenAI you know, tends to publish, share its code, tends to make its you know, iterations public, will publish research, will share data even with competitors in a lot of situations, is open to ethical scrutiny by its community, blah blah blah. OpenAI ironically began with the name open, still holding on to it, yet is regularly accused now of secrecy, of hiding stuff, of not revealing its code, and also, perhaps most interestingly, some of the most successful jailbreaks of text-based OpenAI, particularly with with Sam Altman's one, is finally getting the AI into a thought experiment where it starts to reveal its secrets. I mean, why are we even talking about revealing its secrets with a company called OpenAI?
Very, very good point.
I want to jump into this one, and I'd love to hear from Jaisal as well in terms of what's been going on in the chat. So I'll just give her a second to prepare while I just make this point. I mean, to what you're saying, I mean, let's go back. So 2022, Meta's revenues were something like $116 billion. And if you think about the main generator of that, of course, is Facebook and the advertising model that they have. And they're doing that on a very, very little amount of data, really. Okay, you've got the WhatsApp metadata and so on and so forth. But on social media, they've got, what you liked, what you shared, what you commented. 3 pieces of data, basically built a business that could do $116 billion in revenue. And we've got a lot more than 3 pieces of information now that we're working with. So do you have a view on OpenAI in terms of their structure, their business model? Sam Altman, of course, not being a shareholder, because I mean, it's limitless, isn't it? If Facebook can do $116 billion off some posts, what you could do off the input of millions of people every day into your chat is staggering. I mean, it's exponentially more than that amount if you're just talking commercially. Am I on the right lines here?
Yeah. I mean, if you're talking about this kind of, because OpenAI have this capped profit model, right?
Yeah.
The kind of I mean, it reflects the ethical challenges, I think, in developing generative AI in two dimensions, right? So the first one, obviously, being the financial one, right? The costs of the research and development into this stuff are insanely high, and to maintain any kind of competitive pace with any of these kind of big tech giants, your Googles and whatnot, the amount of money, I can't even begin to fathom kind of what kind of money is required to is required. So there's often that it makes sense there is that need to transition to some sort of a full profit model, and that capped profit, which an 100 times return for investors, which is still a bloody good return for investors, right? Come on.
I'll take it.
Is supposedly that middle ground, I guess, that they've had that enables them to raise funds but still mitigating the potential for unchecked profit seeking. But I think the very nature of this transition is the second challenge, and it's that it lies at that intersection of economics, of ethics, and technology. Generative AI systems like GPT, they learn from vast amounts of data, that most of which come from people like you or I, the everyday users. So every interaction that we're doing is kind of contributing to these models. So I know it's completely unrealistic to think of in this modern sort of capitalist world we live in, but it does, whenever I think about that, it leads me to that question of, well, who should really be benefiting from this value creation? I know that obviously, we live in a world where with social media platforms like Facebook, people aren't actually kind of being compensated for for the data that they're inputting. But I think, I don't know, it's something worth thinking about.
We've been indoctrinated to that idea very quickly that it's okay for others to profit off your videos that you upload and your posts that you create.
Potentially so. Potentially, we've been desensitized and thus implicitly, agreeing to this contract with these major tech players in a way that may come back to bite us in.
But how did that happen? What are your thoughts? How did we suddenly accept that it was okay to do podcasts for free, whilst Google and others just made mountains of cash? What was the big dupe there?
I think with AI coming into picture, I think people have I think people want to talk about it, and then coming to talking about like doing podcasts for free. If we're just talking about, a bunch of people sitting together like us and sort of talking about the implications of AI, this whole, I think Paul mentioned this earlier about how sort of they made AI into this thing that, okay, you sort of have to be afraid of, or maybe it's gonna do things that are gonna replace people's jobs, simple things like that, where people started really talking about it, and it's become this big thing. It's a little off topic, but I'm gonna have to jump into this just for a minute. I think it really, I'm a big believer that unless and until AI reaches some sort of sentience, I don't think there's too much cause to sort of panic or assume that it's going to take our jobs, or it's going to do all the tasks for us. Like, even for businesses, we're talking about how AI is helping. Let's talk about simple tasks like note making. When you're in Zoom meetings and you want it to make all the notes for you so that you can refer back to it, or for tasks like social media captioning or creating images for social media. I mean, this is definitely a task humans can perform, but with AI, you're saving time, you're saving money. And so these tasks it's only adding on to, our lives, but only when, or if we have the sort of super intelligence, I think, that could potentially have sentience or experiences of its own. Then there's the question of, okay, then the questions of autonomy rise. Then open source, I don't think, can exist in such a situation. So, I mean, it's only about waiting and seeing how these systems are going to develop. I mean, there's a lot of research, going on to how this could happen. But okay, I'm gonna
No. I just want to ask, is this content, is it like a natural resource though?
Sort of.
I know it's not, but should it be treated like a natural resource?
I think it already is being sort of treated like a natural resource, all of this content.
What about
But I think that's
reasons?
that's where the problem is. The problem lies particularly when, and it's beginning, and Marcus, who's on the call, is doing some interesting stuff with drones, is when generative AI is linked to physical agency, as is already on the battlefield and all kinds of other stuff. But if robotic agriculture even 5 years ago was programming robots to do certain tasks with very limited kind of inductive machine learning in them, now they behave according to large language models, and that enables them to pick with great accuracy and gamble on the next strawberry and kind of get it right, and so on. The problem we've got is, as it finds its way into health, as we think about the next potential pandemic being even bigger than the last one, what model works best? We know that with open source innovation that's going on in generative AI, people are sharing hyperparameters, which basically means we can all get bias better because we're sharing hyperparameters. In health, it can be the difference between interpreting a tumor scan in one way or another. And, the criticisms and the praise for the pharmaceutical companies during COVID was that some, more than ever before, shared their data sets very quickly. And now some are being accused they didn't quite do that, and that led to certain vaccines not being developed as quickly, and so on. And that the only way we got that vaccine so quickly was so much data sharing and open source innovation was actually happening. So are we in a position at the moment where, as we go towards generative AI tools linking up to physical things, that actually the proprietary models, will their innovation systems be fast enough to create accessibility around the world, in the developing world, with income differences? Or is it the open source approach to generative AI that's going to be more equitable, more responsive, and less potentially dangerous?
Massive questions. I want to hop to Melanie, not necessarily because she wants to answer that particular one, but because she's departing in 3 or 4 minutes. So I'd love to just get some final words from you, Melanie, before we lose your presence tonight.
Yeah, apologies, everyone. I've really enjoyed this discussion on the note of actually self-sovereign identity and decentralized ownership of data and everything. Have to head to London School of Economics to moderate a Web3 panel. So I'll take some of these awesome ideas with me on the bus on my way to there. Some final thoughts. Yeah, lots of food for thought. Absolutely loving the discussion. I think the question is for each of us, or as a takeaway, at least for me, what is our role in it? Where can we make a difference, today, as we decide, either as an employee within a large company or startup, when we have to choose between proprietary and open source, what are the parameters or factors we are considering? but also as we contribute, for example, to open source models, as we discussed, if there's a bigger community around it, like we have with, certain programming communities, there is definitely, more room for experimentation and less things can go wrong. So I would say definitely let's contribute. And Divya, just to say, I absolutely loved when you said, I've tried these models and I'm using certain models for X, Y, Z. Let's just do that. I would encourage everyone to get involved, start creating. One thing like that I realized, and that has absolutely blown my mind over the past few weeks, is that now you can set up a business within a day. Oh my gosh, there's AI that creates your website, your logo, your brand images, that runs marketing campaigns for you. Like, get out there and try out all of these amazing tools. If you're an artist, as Divya said, like, you can create amazing artwork. So, and as we are learning to use these tools and integrate them into our lives and our work, let's understand the ethics around it. We talked about inclusive data sets. We talked about data management and data processing. Let's make sure we put the systems and frameworks and just mechanisms in place to do all of that responsibly. And what I also really loved about this conversation is just all of these questions coming in. Let's keep asking questions and let's keep up the dialogue and let's have conversations. So that's me. Yeah. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much for your presence today. Good luck with the panel.
Thank you.
Say hi from us.
I will. And if you have any whatever further questions or want to continue chatting, just ping me on LinkedIn. Lovely to meet you all. Thank you.
Thanks. Have a great evening.
Bye.
And with Melanie leaving a chair open there as well, please do give me a shout or a wave in the chat if you're hearing this conversation thinking, I've got some great things I could add to this. Please do let me know. We're very much ad hoc in that sense and would enjoy some more contribution as we have seats available. Jason, we've been trying to come to you for about 45 minutes.
Yes, the chat is really busy, and
What's happening?
I think people have really got great ideas, and I would like to credit some of the statements that have come in, because we have a Q&A section, so I wouldn't be going to the questions now, but some of the statements that have come from people and that makes some sense, and we should get some comments from our panelists as well. So Mark Weiser has said that the biggest danger is self-improving systems, and large language models are very close, and there are too many people trying to close the loop. This is really important, I think, because we are already seeing how ChatGPT has been progressing so quickly, and it's been trying to collect data. Jerry, I must tell you this statement is really important, which you have put onto the chat, that at least with proprietary offerings, one might implement some influence or governance or control. With open source, this isn't a possibility. Of course, we will hear from our panelists, but let me add some few more statements and then we can hear from them. And Laitoniet Chua has added, there should be a data ownership rights. I think this is quite important because Melanie also added now everything about frameworks, data, and so this is quite important. There should be a data ownership rights in the first place. In any training of generative AI, it should be individual owners opting in, not opting out. Some sort of universal basic data income, because clearly the individual users has no bargaining power in many vectors against too powerful tech group monopoly. And I think Ravi has added very kindly, which even Melanie mentioned, is about decentralized identity, and a real person data must be ownable and monetized. But when it will actually arrive and get adopted, we do not know. So I think these are some of the great statements that are coming in, some things about business models as well, but I wouldn't add that or mix it here now. Are there any comments, Yemi, from your end?
I've got a comment for you. I don't know how you've kept up with the chat. I just exported the chat into Excel 10 seconds ago, 652 messages so far in that chat.
Yes, yes. I've been picking questions and statements that make some sense for this forum and are really relating to what the panelists are saying. I can't pick every statement because it may not be relevant to our chat.
That was brilliant. Thank you so much for bringing that in. And Yemi, to you.
I mean, it's a very quick comment to make. I mean, if we're talking about the kind of the race, I guess, between open source and OpenAI, or Google and whatever, I guess one of the other comparisons that I often make with generative AI is like the internet, right? Like it's this new sort of thing that's come along and is going to change all of our lives, and has, on the one hand, lots of people sitting there talking about the boundless opportunities and rewards that one can get from it, and equally has people talking about the risks and dangers that come with it. And I think that we have to remember that the modern internet runs on open source for a reason, because open source has some significant advantages that I think some of those big players potentially will never be able to replicate. And so I feel like I'm flipping between opinions over the course of this entire event this evening, but I think we have to have some faith that directly competing with open source is probably actually in the long run a losing proposition. But yeah, don't know what others think.
I'm going to dive in while we've still got Yemi. Yemi, when we were chatting through what we might cover today, I threw some stinker questions at you. So I'm going to throw one. Going to throw one of them at you. But
you seem to throw this.
Happy to open.
Sorry, Yemi. Sorry, by the way.
Open this up. But let's for a moment think about digital transformation in an organization. And in this case, in this use case, this is a health trust in the UK that runs a number of hospitals, and there is a bunch of digital transformation leaders meeting up. They've done some horizon scanning. They're aware that in a different health trust, there's been a really successfully reported pilot project where they've invested in a proprietary generative AI product that's helping with CT scanning of cancer, cutting the costs, cutting the time, improving the accuracy, which is leading to better outcomes for chemotherapy, and so on. They've heard that one. They've heard of another health trust, which actually produced exactly the same results. The only difference is one was a proprietary piece from a medical company. The other one was an open source product, and it didn't cost them anything. And they're saying, we did this on little or no budget. This stuff is amazing. This company's trying to find a way forward. Scenarios where large language models say we can now start to do very specific diagnosis based on large language models that can lead to exercise regimes that will make someone live longer for 6 months, blah, 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 longevity, all kinds of stuff coming on the horizon. They're looking for a way forward. Is the default to be proprietary generative AI? Is it irresponsible for something like a health trust organization to look to its budget and look to the open source community for its first pilot project? Is there an answer to my stinky question?
Your stinky question. To be honest with you, I don't know, because I don't know enough about I'm sure there are tons of, regulations and privacy laws within healthcare. And I think that, you need to really have a really strong depth of understanding and grasp of those to be able to then figure out how they apply to the use of AI in your healthcare institution, and thus which is going to be the right model to use.
But I wonder if Himanshu in the chat is just making it easy for us before we get lost in some of the specific arguments. I mean, isn't it as simple as if patient privacy is a major issue, which it is, we just can't risk open source. We are going to get contractual guarantees that we will pay for, if we go down the proprietary route. Isn't it at the moment, it's too dangerous when we're talking about customer data to be risking open source innovation unless there's contracts and contract law and governance around it? Or am I being naive?
So I could comment on that. We seem to be getting mixed up in some terminology here. So I'm confused as to how a large language model, language being the operative word, is going to be applied to CT scans. I think yes, generative AI can do things in that area, but it's not LLMs, it's something else. And in this case, open source doesn't mean giving your data to somebody. You can have open source on premise. You could completely control whatever you do with open source without your data going anywhere else. So
just to challenge back, Alex, though, the whole stuff is, it is about large language models. This is
no, it's not. It's about large models.
Yeah,
large models. The images, the models for images, they're not language models.
well,
Don't get pushed around, Alex, whatever you do,
okay,
right?
just to push around again.
No, push back. Always push back on Paul, everybody.
Yeah, it's generative AI generating, for example, a plan for an operation based on being trained on very, very large data sets and using inductive machine learning.
Absolutely, but it's a data set, it's not a text set. So the thing about a large language model, which underlines GPT-4 and Lambda and the various others, is it's just text, right? It's unstructured text. It's not any kind of conceptual structured data. In the healthcare industry, you would have conceptual structured data. In an image, you would have conceptual structured data. You'd have objects, you'd have pixel locations on a screen, all of that stuff. Large language models is the wrong term. That's all I'm saying.
I am, but I'm using it deliberately lazily because the principle's the same. That's why.
So you want to talk about deep neural networks?
Well, we can talk all about it. It becomes the same issue.
Yeah, but terminology gets confusing here. And if we're talking about just generative AI, I think there's no reason why that can't be done on premise. It doesn't have to be done in the cloud, or if it is done in the cloud, it could be done in a private cloud. So data privacy isn't necessarily a concern. What is a concern is data quality. And one of the things I wanted to mention that hasn't been mentioned yet is the tendency in the open source community, and possibly in enterprises as well, to use generative AI to generate more data to train generative AI. So you take your CT scans, you realize you've only got 100,000 digitized CT scans, it's not very much. So you generate another 1 million CT scans, and you then train a model with 10% of real CT scans and 1 million generated ones. Now, some of those generated ones will be good. They'll label the cancer the right way or the wrong way. Some of them will not be good. And it only takes one to kill somebody. So that, I think, is a big concern for anybody who says we can do this ourselves. How much do you actually know about data quality? How much do you actually know about data cleaning? How much do you actually know about bias? How much are you going to test the data before you build your model? And that, I would hope, is something that a supplier would do for you, or at least advise you on. Whereas if you do it yourself, if you wing it, if you take whoever's written whatever on Reddit, God knows what's going to happen.
Alex, just
the classic garbage in, garbage out.
Absolutely,
like constantly, right? And like, but with a much more significant impact on the other side. Yeah.
Just while you guys are on screen, I'm not sure we really tackled something that was on my mind ahead of this forum. Is that we had organizations like JP Morgan saying, guys, do not use ChatGPT in this organization. You're going to be uploading, secure information. That's nuts. Please don't do that. So at this point, Alex, from what you're saying, it sounds like if they still feel the need for the LLMs to be used in the organization, either at a bring your own device kind of way or in a corporate way, then their options are then to implement something in-house. And then I guess it doesn't really matter whether we're talking about a proprietary system or an open source system, but something where they can see the complete supply chain and voyage of the data, first of all, yes?
Yeah, absolutely. And you could have multi-tenant secure LLM, the same way as you have multi-tenant secure banking systems.
I'm an employee for JP Morgan. I need some help, whether I'm coding or creating content, something like this. What am I missing out on by not being allowed to use, say, ChatGPT-4, and I have to use this in-house system that's been deployed? What's the downsides for me?
Scale and the amount of other information that's come from other users, I suppose. And how anybody manages to keep that secure is an open question. It hasn't come up yet because nobody's really doing that. But I mean, Samsung, for instance, learned the hard way, and I'm damn sure that Samsung are building their own in-house system after somebody asked ChatGPT, well, yes, I think it was ChatGPT, to write them some code for their new release, and that code was suddenly all over the internet.
But wouldn't JP Morgan want to have a meeting with OpenAI and vice versa, perhaps, where OpenAI would say, look, we obviously don't want to lose your business. We'll give you a corporate account for X million dollars a year, and we'll make these guarantees to you.
The question that I think I'm still asking, and I take Alex's point about, we can push into the future, but the nature of the large language models that I'm hearing about in the health service at the moment is one of the things health services do to distraction is they take notes. They are as text-based as they've ever been. And it's very possible to take all of the notes written by surgeons, record with Alexa eventually, and use Fireflies to record all the Zoom meetings, all the patient meetings and all of that, and train on large language models that lead to things like surgical plans, diet plans, all types of stuff that's based on generative AI models. Now, one model of that is to say we only work with proprietary companies. It's very governed. The data is there. The NHS is already looking at selling its data to the private sector as a way of actually making money anyway, and data leaks. So ultimately, there's still going to be the same dynamic when we start to look at this about I was going to Yemi, if I'm the digital transformation team and there are two tools on offer and one is in the open source community and the other one's the premier one, but it's hidden behind a bunch of governance, ultimately with tight budgets, what is my strategy to be?
Very, very quickly, 10 words, if I may, Yemi, because I was going to say this earlier. Why not do both? Get a commercial pilot and do your own pilot.
So say a bit more about that, Alex. It'd just be good to hear. What does both look like to me as a digital transformation manager with a few $100,000 to spend?
So I've been in this situation with various customers who've said, our guys are going to build it. We'd like you to do a free pilot for us and see if our guys are better or your system is better. And sometimes they are, and sometimes they aren't. And sometimes it's free, and sometimes it's costed, and there are various ways of, slicing that particular onion. But you could absolutely do both.
Interesting.
Yemi, you want to jump in, or I know Graham's wanted to raise a comment, perhaps, or ask a question.
No, go for Graham. Yeah.
Yeah, I actually worked in the education sector, and we were working on making sure that educational data was being piped through the OpenAI's API. And so we had to go in and set up our organization key. And I read through all the privacy policies, and it's really tricky. You have to opt out of retraining. There's a lot of different hoops you have to jump through. So it's not like they definitely don't want you to do it, but it is if they're not lying, which I'm always open to the fact that they could be. If they're not lying, then there is a way to do it through the corporate account, but I'm not sure that I trust it.
Okay. Yeah, Graham, thanks. Thanks for adding that contribution. Just give me a wave if you need anything else, and just back on the screen there. Jaisal, do you want to catch us up on the chat just while there's a sort of natural, and then we probably want to hear more from Vijay, don't we?
Absolutely. I'll just give in some comments that came in after Paul raised so many issues on the healthcare, and we must credit people for it. And I think there was something from David Wood, and he said, alongside complaints about patient privacy potentially being violated by generative AI, let's remember that ways in which Google's MED Palm 2 is already providing answers to medical questions at a level generally comparable to expert human clinicians. Daniel Hall said, the security and personal risk to patients creates an issue for analytics. Inputted information onto systems. Everybody in life becomes a patient at some point. Therefore, it threatens everybody's personal data. Responsible use, policy, accountability, and responsibility is critical. Otherwise, it is allowing AI to continually be miscreated amongst fake news, information processing, and adjective irregularities as misinformation largely exists on the internet. And finally, Ajmer has said AI has the potential to certain risks and challenges that need to be addressed: data privacy and security, bias and fairness, lack of human oversight, regulatory challenges, lack of understanding.
But on that, Richard, coming back to you, Richard, before we throw it open, I know we've got some people coming on the call. Richard, we've hosted a lot of these meetings. It feels like we're coming back to a place in this conversation where ultimately, if we over-regulate, for whatever reasons, the open source community, do we kill innovation?
We over-regulate the open source community.
Yeah, so if the open source community starts to become subject to a lot of the rules and regs that, you know, the proprietary community would do, ultimately, is that going to kill the very innovation that's led to some of the stuff we're talking about today?
I mean, we don't know for certain, but as a blanket rule, I don't believe that an ethical consideration ever harms innovation. I mean, innovation is about creating the world that we want to see. It's not just about a money machine.
I didn't say ethics. I said if we over-regulate. So if we err on the side of, if we don't understand it, it's probably unethical, we better regulate it.
Well, look, I mean, I was go-karting, or it's called karting now, isn't it, once? And every single corner, I hit the car in front of me. And at the end of it, I said, what's your job to this guy? And he said, I'm a pharmacist. He said, you? And I said, I'm a new business sales guy, I said at the time. And I answered every question we had about why I kept banging into him every single corner. He was clearly more cautious than me. And I thought it's probably good that I don't work in a dispensary saying, why don't you try a bit of this? Why don't you try a bit of that? And so, of course, it's not the answer to have either extreme. But I really don't think that in any other domain we could have got away with this. I just don't think you could have launched a ChatGPT or other similar entities into the pharmaceutical industry or
well,
the
only
food
unless,
industry,
Richard, you're
right?
bumping. Only if you're bumping eventually created a cure for headaches.
But the reason that we're allowed to do this is because we don't take mental health seriously. We don't seem to care as a society about the impact that these kinds of tools have on our wellness and on suicide and on the vulnerabilities that we have. I say this all the time, we're the dominant hominid because our social skills are so brilliant. That's a blessing and a curse. It means that as a species, we make loads of mental shortcuts. We have to. And then you systematically can sit there as a technologist and you can exploit every single one of those mental shortcuts, as we've seen play out on social media nonstop. And you can make an absolute damn fortune from doing it. And no sense is that ethical. It's no different to exploiting children because it's.
But what's interesting in this field, Richard, is that the proprietary and the open source community are not, innocent of that.
Many of us aren't. And until we take it seriously, we're going to keep bombarding our brains. And then we thank technology for solving problems that they created in the first place. And so let's not get lost in that mire. Then we're saying, is regulation going to ruin innovation? We've got to zoom out and go, what the hell's going on here in the first place? Anyway, Ashley's got far cooler sunglasses than me, so I think it's only respectful.
Thank you. I'm in Spain, so we need them. So I have lots of thoughts on the regulating that, but I'll go back to it. I think it's important to delineate running a model where you're literally running it on ChatGPT as the API versus training, so fine tuning a model that Alex was talking about. When you're running it on your own proprietary data, you're running it on your system. You actually control how the data is sent back. So there's federated learning, there's edge computing. Those are very different things than running an API through your system, right? So we need to, I would say, pull that away from the conversation, because that doesn't actually, you can use an open source model in that way, and you can use a model run by open source. That's not actually the conversation versus the two. It needs to be on well, in my opinion, right? Going back to like, what's the essence of running a paid for model versus an open source model, and then how you ultimately choose to do that, right? That's your responsibility as a company. And so the discussion, it's not so much about that, right? And even like synthetic data that's been used for years and years, right? Like that's actually good in some instances, right? Especially when we're talking about health data, because it's a way to actually maintain privacy by changing things, etc. So I think it's getting back to, again, what is the difference between leveraging an open source model that is developed differently, has different regulations, etc. And also, I would say the incentives, because I think the crux of the problem goes back to what are the incentives for these organizations and how are they quickly releasing, etc. And then rather than, again, back to like kind of how you're executing on that. So I just
ultimately, Ashley, do you think then the market should be left to make that decision? The customers vote with their feet, or do we have to regulate?
No, because the market doesn't understand anything. The market has got us into this position.
So what kind of regulation does the open source space need?
So my problem with saying open source versus proprietary is the harm doesn't matter whether it's open source or proprietary.
Agreed. Okay, so
ultimately suicide rates, whatever. I don't, whether I decided to take my life based on an open source model or a proprietary model, does that really matter at the end of the day? The consequences are very similar. So I don't think we need to look at the outcome and the incentives, yes, because the incentives drive the outcomes. But even the open source models are competing in an environment where they're competing with capitalistic structures, right? At the end of the day. And I'm not an expert in open source. I haven't worked on open source in the past. So I worked at the big ones. So I believe in regulation, more around outcomes, more around creating diverse voices like people here. But I also think it's really important to educate people on the facts and so I agree with open source. I'm not against that by any means. But I think that we can't look at the harms as dependent on where the model came from.
Okay. So Richard, you were mentioning a little while ago diverse communities and different parts of the world and places where the money simply isn't there not to use an open source model. You can't buy this. If you can't build it, then you're just not going to get it. I think we have to accept that there is going to be a level of use of open source, and as you said, that's going to have a generally good outcome. And whether that is as good as the people who choose to buy, or whether that then develops a level of open source competence and a level of open source, what would you call it, products, not really products, but open source packages, which then are equivalent to a commercial model, remains to be seen. But I think that is going to be an inevitable crutch for all of the places that don't have the kind of money that is in the Western world, the kind of money that people like Google and Amazon are looking for their products.
Yeah, Alex, thank you. And it reminds me, and I won't ask you to comment because I think we need to just jump into some other people, but people's thoughts, sorry. But it reminds me of, when Facebook was saying, here's free internet for you in these countries, but you're coming at it through Facebook, and that sort of opportunity for power and control and distribution. Reginald, so brilliant to see you. You're very welcome. This is a challenging day, I think, on your connection, but it is really nice to have you on our screens, and hopefully we'll get to hear from you. I want to get more into trust and the bigger picture, and I want to hear more from Vijay on that as well. Monica, you've got your hand up. You want to drop in a comment?
Yes, I just wanted to say that within different scenarios, I have used different systems, and I have sometimes used open source stuff mainly for startups and for building my own products. I used some open source stuff last year, meaning sometimes when you're just beginning to create something, you are forced to modify your model to what you're creating. And then at the same time, I think that the ecosystems are also self-regulating, meaning our understanding of ethics for everyone who works in the IT sphere is a bit changing currently, meaning I will not just jump in and build something for somebody that I do not believe has the best intentions for what they're going to be doing with that product. I will self-regulate my response to them, and I will probably run away if they're only motivated by money, because there is a lot of places where you can make money in the IT sphere currently without having to do something that is necessarily immoral or utilizing people's emotions in a harmful fashion. So I think that there is like it's wonderful to have regulations, it's wonderful to have frameworks, but this is where ethics comes in. You go into a couple of MKAI forums, you learn a bit about the ethics of what is happening, you learn about its impact, and then you sort of self-moderate and you try and figure out your balance. And these companies that are not respecting the ecosystem, that are not respecting the balance, they're going to lose employees eventually, and they're going to lose the people that are not motivated purely by the monetary means. So I think that there is an evolution happening currently. So hopefully that will also help out in the ethical aspect of things. Moving off the call so that I can listen to everybody.
Thanks, Monica. Great to see you. Reginald, how's the bandwidth going?
Okay. I just want to touch on a few things, all right, from the question that was asked to Richard regarding whether open source kills innovation. I want to ask a question, but I also tend to answer that very question also. When you talk about open source, it's a forum to open collaboration, all right, bringing on board different ideas to know how best we can speed up certain ideas or innovation. So open source is more about collaborating to speed up innovation, getting to know what people have in mind and how best they can help speed up innovation. Take, for example, an open source project like TensorFlow. There is something being done by them to make sure that there is supervision, there's regulations, and that is a system where developers tend to supervise projects or initiatives that are done by the open source community. So for saying that, I really don't really stand by the fact that saying that open source kills innovation. Rather, I feel it boosts innovation where you have millions of beautiful ideas, a lot of AI enthusiasts coming together to build our projects. It's just regulations that needs to come up. The question that comes up with the regulation is it in the best interest of the people that are going to use this product? If it is in the best interest of the people, then there is no need, I don't see reasons why we don't need to go for it. But if it is not in the best interest of users, then there has to be a critical consideration of such thing. That's why I feel.
Just moving this,
yeah, Paul.
Just moving this in a slightly different direction with time running out. And I guess I'm on home territory here, and I think maybe Dvia, you'd be into this as well. Let's talk about the word generative in a different way with generation. And maybe David Wood would like to come in at some point about generation. Some people are calling it generation A, not even generation Z. And some of the research I'm reading is that generation A, if generation Z were the, kind of post-millennials, millennials, generation A is a kind of mixed generation. It includes elderly people, it includes younger people. They're kind of bound by an ethos of openness. They're an ethos of wanting to, more than ever, take their own phone to work. They want to be able to choose what tools they use, what content they generate. They want to be able to mash up songs if they want to, and they're very drawn towards some of this technology. And one of the use case scenarios, Richard, at the moment is around universities, and one that I work in, and they're having the trouble of the students are already starting to write their essays on generative AI. The lecturers are starting to sneakily mark at least first-year essays using ChatGPT, despite policies that go, you're not allowed to use it, or these are the only tools that you're allowed to use. We bought these proprietary tools, and as often happens, they're not the best ones. They go out of date, and everybody's using the open source stuff anyway on their phones. So you get a kind of underground movement, you get a reactionism against any attempts to control it, any attempts to govern it anyway, because it's a generation that is aligned to what generative AI is all about. So notwithstanding everything you say about mental health and the opportunism and some of the, mental health wise disastrous apps that are offering to solve people's emotional problems, and hearing the stories of ChatGPT type tools telling people to commit suicide and how to, and all of this kind of stuff. There is a wave, a cultural wave now in favor of this. And so it's not about proprietary or open source anymore. It's about open source, maybe governance, but proprietary is on the way out. Just wonder if anyone has any thoughts. David, you got your hand up early in what I was saying.
Yeah, we'll come to David in a second, if that's okay.
Yeah.
And Divija, what's on your mind around that?
I think that with open source, let me go back a bit more to the trust aspect of it. I think with AI, I mean, most of the people who wanted to understand it, to truly understand how systems like these work, or how generative AI generates, data, either in the form of text with LLMs or images or videos or whatever it is that, we've been wanting it to generate. And this is the thing, that the reason that open source is becoming increasingly famous. One of the criteria against is the cost, but other than that, it is the trust that people can gain out of using it. I think before the internet came out, we may not had the clarity of what exactly it would have been, but over the years we've adapted to it, and now it's become this irreplaceable part of our lives. And with AI, the trust and openness that comes with the open source AI, I think people are becoming a lot more integrated with it. And if this is the case, if people are feeling that it has become a big part of their lives over the next few years, in whatever way it will move forward, then yes, open source would be a great, the thing for the next future. But again, when I talk about how AI right now is in such flux, the developments in the field are moving so fast. If you see the differences between how, just in terms of performance, between GPT-4 now and with the first one, or with the first sort of systems we'd ever built, they are getting a lot more advanced. And again, this whole research central around sort of, can AI sentience be possible? I think with that sort of research, I think it would be more of the closed source stuff working, such companies would want to research in a closed source space for such AI developments. But with regards with tasks for businesses or for everyday users, or for the new generation, like you're talking about Gen A, who wants to experiment and really get involved with this sort of new technology, then open source is what is working out best, and could probably, go above closed source in terms of opinions of what people are preferring.
I want to hear just a little bit more, and if David, you need to jump in, there's something like right now, then do shout. But let's just talk about your wider work for a moment as well, and which ties in a little bit with what David Wood is focused on. I mean, we met you in terms of thinking about consciousness and about the human and the AI intersecting and connection. How does this conversation relate to? How does this conversation relate? Are they disconnected or connected at the moment?
I mean, I think they are very connected. I would think so, to your day job tomorrow. Okay, I would say for the mass of the people on this planet, I think the main concerns are, okay, waking up, going to your job tomorrow, providing for your family, or, I mean, let's keep researchers aside who have this hunger or quest for knowledge. They need to know, what's going to happen next. But for the average person who probably is just exploring AI on the face of it, because it's this new big thing, like the internet was a few years ago. Just on the face of that, I think AI is, this fun new toy, I would say, sort of, where people are playing around with it, using it for day-to-day conversations, or like I think Paul mentioned with university students, like first years, undergraduates are using it to write philosophy essays even. But it's funny because when we talk about things like writing essays or giving your opinions, obviously the systems we have right now cannot do that, since it has no sort of, self model in the spatio-temporal realm. It doesn't understand the true nature of self-identity, or just it has no concept of what it is likeness to be itself, because there is nothing it is like to be an AI model. So when it comes to this whole consciousness talk with the everyday person going to their job, I think it's very interesting because, I mean, I think all of us know about the Google engineer talking about how he thought that Lambda was sentient. I think this was like about a year ago, right? In fact, it wasn't. But I think this has really opened this can of worms where researchers actually are very interested to see whether AI can be sentient. And this question truly arises because the question of consciousness in humans as well has not really been solved. So we don't have a particular answer for how consciousness arises within humans. Obviously, we have different neurobiological theories, phenomenological theories, but we don't have a particular answer. So this this opens up like a massive door in AI research that, okay, if we are assuming this physical, obviously, world, then there is no reason for AI to not be sentient, because we have for a very long time correlated sentience or consciousness, whatever we may want, the general person wants to call it, with intelligence. And we are going forward to an age of intelligence, which may just, cross human intelligence. The only thing with the AI we have right now is that it provides artificial narrow intelligence. So it provides singular tasks, and it does it really, really well, maybe better than a human. Like, I don't imagine any of us sitting down and taking notes in a meeting with the way AI, I think tons of AIs do that. I think Otter AI is a good one that does that. So, I mean, if such technology is moving forward, then yes, it is going to be a threat for the everyday average person who may think that this could, threaten their job. I mean, right now, in fact, even right now, when we're talking about using AI in terms for marketing, innovation, for, chatbots for customer usage, I think some people, or maybe in an organization, like how you have A, B, C, D type of players in an organization, a business organization, in a corporate environment, I think it is enhancing a D player to maybe a B player. And this is a very good thing for organizations, for businesses, because it is overall taking their, increasing their efficiency. But slowly over time, I think it may turn out to be an insecurity for some individuals. And I think that people have been talking about these things, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I've been long an advocate that the EQ of these systems is kind of non-existent. But I had a partner, a relational partner, not so long ago, who burst into tears. And I sat on the sofa and I thought, I have literally no idea why she's crying. I have no clue at all. And I sat there and I thought, you know what? If an AI, as we know them right now, had been monitoring the conversation for the last 3 hours, I'm sure it could say to me, this is the reason. And I thought, does that make it have a higher EQ than me? Because I thought that's where I was winning.
I mean, again, I think concepts like EQ are very closely related with intelligence. And so artificial intelligence in a particular task is really good. Like I can give you an example of the system called Replica. I think Google is the one who created Replica. I don't know. Yeah. But again, the task of the system is to behave like a partner or a friend or whatever it is that you want it to be. And I think its task in particular is to provide this high level of EQ, because again, this is like emotional intelligence is again a big part of intelligence. And then even when I talk about creative intelligence, even simple tasks that large language models perform, just putting sentences together, this involves creative intelligence. It's it's not just art or aesthetics or these things that require creative intelligence. It's that humans use these different forms of intelligences integrated together. And with AI, I think with truly trying to understand how it works, with open source AI, at least there's this sort of understanding to the back end of it. You know, if, for example, if you actually had a model like Replica in front of you, and the system is telling you why your partner has, led to this conclusion, you would probably, if it was an open source system, you would probably want to go back to the, if you're someone who really understands code, who understands these things, you could have a shot at truly understanding how it is coming to these conclusions. Obviously, it's going to be different than the way humans would, because again, the whole question of how we are connecting our subjective experiences to our intelligence is a mystery.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm happy to say we made up again.
Yeah.
But I've still no idea what we were making up from, but I won't bring my problems into the conversation.
Richard, we've got lots of people with hands up and just 15 minutes to go, so I don't know how you want to play that.
Noted. Yeah. Well, okay. So we aren't going to close the call. So if this is a contribution that you want to continue after 6, I know a bunch of people are going to drop off, and that's absolutely fine. But let's go around a few hands. But Paul, I'm really keen that we have a bit of a summary today as well. So how long do you need to sort of reflect today for us?
Well, just a few minutes, but I'm also keen that we get David's input, because I know he's been very patient. So
all right, well, let's come to you at 5 to 6, no matter what then, okay?
Yeah.
David, with you?
Oh, sorry, David. And before you answer, can I just pose a question to you that I would bet money you won't answer, but you're a futurist and I'm going to pose it to you anyway. It's a very general question, and I know you perhaps would need more time for this. If there was a race, a bit like, the Monte Carlo rally, between the open source generative AI community and the current conglomerate of behind the firewall corporate proprietary innovators in their R&D labs and so on, if there was a race to artificial generative intelligence, who would win?
If there was no change from the present situation, AGI is most likely to be created inside DeepMind or inside OpenAI. There are enormous teams there who are doing a heck of a lot of things. It's not just big data. It's not just large scale models with trillions of parameters. They have huge architecture of multiple things. So if it was no change in the system, that's where AGI is most likely to emerge. However, I don't think we should just stand back and say, let everybody race. I think we as humans, as citizens, as Democrats, we have to try and influence how these things evolve. And the conclusion of what I wanted to say, I have quite a few things I hope to try and squeeze in. The conclusion, just jumping ahead, is that the answer is not open source or proprietary source. It is citizens having a democratic oversight over what's going on in these companies, which involves smarter regulations, more nimble regulations than are currently in place. And that's hard, and we're going to have to step up to do that. Just quickly backtracking through what some of the things that's been discussed, I completely agree that AI has emotional intelligence of a sort already, which in some ways is better than most humans' emotional intelligence. There was a paper in JAMA, the Journal of American Medical Association, in April, which looked at the answers given by ChatGPT to medical queries raised by people who were concerned about medical issues in the Ask a Doctor group in Reddit. It looked at large numbers of these questions, and it rated the answers given by ChatGPT as not only more technically accurate than the human doctors who were answering questions on Reddit, they were also more empathetic. They had more of the human touch. So there is very interesting data there that says some of these systems are, in some sense, better at holding the hands of would-be, not literally, but at least sending the right messages than some human doctors. So there is emotional intelligence here. I want to avoid going down a discussion of sentience in AI, important for that is, because I think the issues for powerful AI arise independently of whether we allow these systems to become sentient. I personally think we have to avoid designing systems that have the potential to become sentient until we understand much more what's going on. But the systems that aren't sentient are already powerful, very capable, with the potential for good and the potential for ill. I liked what was said a while ago, I think by you, Paul, that we should be focusing on some of the benefits that can come out of collaboration. I'm a great fan of collaborating. I think we are smarter when we're able to cooperate. Most of the smartest people in the world do not work for us in our company. And the potential upsides aren't just better medical chatbots, as discussed. There is lots of potential for breakthroughs in chemistry. We have variants of generative AI, which are already doing novel chemistry, doing novel biology, doing novel drug discovery, so that we should celebrate. But at the same time, and this is what, to my mind, has been most missing from this conversation, admirable though it has been in many ways, what has been most missing is a clearer inspection of what are the risks of spreading these generative AIs more widely. And the risks are an upsurge in malware, an upsurge in ransomware, an upsurge in hacking of all sorts. And it's hard for us to think about that because those of us who are on this call, we're all nice people. We wouldn't want to hack. We wouldn't want to steal. We wouldn't want to distort. But there are enough disturbed or confused or, frankly, nasty people in this world. There are already systems that are being sold. Look up Worm GPT, which is a system designed to help people create their own phishing emails. There's going to be more of that. The potential for that kind of abuse of generative AI was the reasons why the team at OpenAI, Sam Altman and Greg Brockway and others said, hang on, we can't make this as open as we would like. There is a big risk here. So the solution, I say again, is democratic oversight, enlightened, informed democratic oversight of the work that's being done by AI developers. And I realize that's heck of a difficult, but I think it is the best approach to take. And as Paul also suggested, that work of oversight can be helped by some AI systems. We can use narrow, well-defined, clearly understood AI systems to help us monitor what people are doing in less well-understood systems. So that's my solution, neither open nor closed, but democratically overseen.
David, thank you so much. And yes, you say there's lots more to cover, but this is, of course, not the end of the journey. And I've just been writing down your thoughts there on what our next forum maybe could cover. We typically create our forums and then have to move them out because something more pressing comes up. We have to shift them back. Thank you for your comments. Rajinder, apologies coming to you so slowly.
Hi, Richard. It's been an awesome conversation. Thank you so much. There's been lots of well-wishing, citizen oversight, as though we had a citizen oversight, even including in our governments. And as you know, that UNSG a couple of days ago has also called for a new UN body to deal with the AI challenges. And as though, again, that is going to resolve issues because, there are already 33 or so UN organizations and they all have to deal with the AI within their organization bodies. And yet now to create another one, and you can think of all the entropy that will be dealt with, and coming back to the open source and not open source, I mean, we can just have a look at technology today and how much open source is being used, where it's being used, and how much proprietary software is being used and where it's being used, and we'll most likely get the same picture. And in terms of consciousness around AI, I don't even think we know what we are up against or truly speaking about, because I think for the first time we've got an intelligent system who's hacked our language system. So how we speak with each other, what we understand from each other, what perspectives that we gain from each other may be very limited to what an AI model could provide. So like you were saying, Richard, that your girlfriend was crying. I think would have been a great opportunity to write that into ChatGPT, provide it with the context, and ask it. So create a structured list of why she could be crying, and I am sure that would educate you in the sense that providing different yeah, it's amazing. I mean, I just want to go back and share my first story with ChatGPT, which I had in December. And how I started off using it was I started off with fairy tales. So I was like, tell me the story of Three Little Pigs. And he told me the story of three little pigs. And I said, can you write me a poem what the first little pig was thinking when the wolf, blew on the door? And it generated what the wolf was thinking, what the first little pig was thinking in a poem. And then I got it to say for the second and the third. And then I got it to say, like, what was the wolf thinking in a poem as it was about to go through the chimney. And he gave me the poem. And I said, imagine if tell me the story of Little Red Riding Hood. And he told me the little story of Red Riding Hood. And I said, well, tell me the story that Little Red Riding Hood saw the wolf going to the third pig's chimney. What was she thinking? And it generated what she would be thinking contextually. So I kind of thought, I said, oh, language is dead. Language is dead in the sense that, we are large language models. Our language is a large language model, and we do speak probabilistically. We try to fit in the context. We try to use the words, that make meaning. We try to give different perspectives. I think just AI is just doing this so much better. It's creating hallucinations, but so are we. All the time, thinking that, oh, open source is going to, resolve the challenges, and so
thanks for debunking our event there.
Right. So I would be cautious to say this and that, and I would be more into the education mode. Let's learn more about it. Let's learn more how we can help.
But I think, Rajinder, it is worth probably kind of mentioning right back at the very first MKAI mention of generative AI in a forum that I remember. It was around the same day that the singer-poet Nick Cave had been sent lyric after lyric and poem after poem showing from fans saying, look, we've generated lyrics in your style. And he published very, very clearly two things. One, he said, these lyrics are shit, excuse my language. But the second point is, even the good ones, he said, don't you get it? As an artist, my sense of value, what gets me up in the morning, isn't what you read in my poetry books. It is the journey. It was what happened last Friday when I was having this thought that led to this word. It's what I threw out. It's the conversations I had. So it's just worth remembering that.
Yes. All of that is really us humans holding on to our last, ring, saying that, oh, I am more than my art because I am me.
No, he wasn't saying that, though, just to be clear. What he was saying was that the output was only 1%. He's not clinging on to the other 99%. He's saying we just happen to have a temporary cultural phase going on in the age of media that may well pass, where we're over.
I understand, Paul. I understand. Paul, I truly understand. But what he's saying, probably is coming off of his own fear. I've written love poems to my friends. They're blasted.
Sorry, being a moderator, I need to be the bad cop.
Just to say,
we're not closing.
To the panelists, I think.
Regina, go on, get your last 10 seconds. Go on.
Well, my last 10 seconds is we have no idea. I don't care if, this person or that person says that, that he can do better than AI. What we are facing with is, for the first time, is a different level of intelligence that humans have never had to deal with. And it's amazing. It's amazing. So let's embrace it with humility. Let's learn more about it, and hopefully, you know, help to, you know, to tune, to direct it for us, to help us do more good. And if we are unable to help us direct it to do more good, it's going to think for its own, because it's using the very model that we are using to understand ourselves, which is language. So thank you so much for letting me share.
Well, okay, guys, don't have a conversation at 2 minutes to 6 that I can't possibly interrupt because it's so brilliant. So that's really difficult for the moderators. So I'm teasing, of course, that's phenomenal, and so much for us to dive into as we keep this session open. So we're 2 minutes over. So we do, Jaisal always talks about us starting and finishing on time, and we've missed that by 2 minutes. So apologies for that, because we respect the 80 of us who are on this call and your time greatly. So what I'd say is this. So first of all, I'll just say a huge thank you. We invited Melanie, obviously had to dash off to LSE earlier on. We've had Jaisal and Jerry co-hosting and moderating. We've had Divisha here, we've had Yemi here, we've had Reginald, who hopefully can stick around as well, because we want to hear more from him. And of course, we've had loads of contributions. Alex has been on our screen, David's been on our screen, Monica's been on our screen, Ashley's been on our screen, Graham's been on our screen. So it's been a lot of fun, a huge amount of fun. I've enjoyed this and learned so much myself over the last 2 hours and 3 minutes. So basically, let's finish there, because we're already 3 minutes over, and say our goodbyes to anybody who does need to get back on with their morning, their afternoon, or just relaxing in the evening, hopefully. But Paula, I'll come to you after our official stop there. So thank you, everybody. And if you wish to stick around to hear this, which I certainly would, how do you think we've done today? David says there's still a lot more that we haven't touched on, which, I mean, I love that kind of feedback. But what have we achieved today, Paul, in this dialogue, do you think?
So what we've achieved, I think, is that we've allowed ourselves to range widely, which means sometimes we've got blind spots around areas such as risk. We could probably have a 2-hour conversation about risk. We've definitely reached that place where it's complicated, and actually it becomes less and less useful to create a binary line between open source or proprietary. And that served us quite well in the innovation debate in the 60s, 70s, 80s. But actually, you know, even large corporations that are larger than countries, that have reach into all kinds of places and universities, you know, as public sector organizations are sponsored by private sector organizations, you know, as the boundaries go, it becomes messy. And so it's not either or, and we haven't yet found the way forward. Absolutely, if this next phase of generative AI isn't debated deeply, the danger is, Richard, the stuff you were saying about mental health, the unintended consequences happen, not because we're not governing it properly, it's because we're not thinking properly, that we're not actually enabling a dialogue to happen. And my concern, for example, in the UK around higher education institutions around the country, cutting back on the arts and humanities and getting rid of their top professors and so on, which they are, is that they're the areas where independent thinking is most often generated, in the jobs that aren't necessarily, you know, linked to digital companies you go and work for. They are the dialogues of education and research that are in the messy areas of philosophy, where we need to have messy conversations around consciousness alongside brain research and get people who wouldn't normally meet into the same room to dialogue. I'm sure that's what Victoria is doing in her work. So I think it's good that we didn't reach any answers particularly, but I would like to thank everyone in the chat for firing us up with some really specific examples. People have been quite specific, and thanks to Alex for, you know, reminding us that at the moment large language models are only one part of the picture, and they're not the catch-all for everything. Although large language models and neural networks are going to converge in ways that we don't know how. So ultimately, I feel like we've opened up a conversation yet again, Richard. I hope it does continue for the next half an hour or so, if only informally, but we've raised a lot of questions, and I'm glad we have.
Yeah, Paul, thank you so much. And if our three invited contributors are still here, which and available for a couple of minutes, I'd just like to get a final word. I know, Yemi, you know, we haven't heard from you for a little while, but before we do that, for just 5 seconds, I've just been into Excel again, 880 chat messages today shared. So this this is incredible. I mean,
and Richard, we've still got
yeah.
Reginald, and at some point, I'm hoping in this informal chat, Reginald, I had a question for you when we were prepping too, because you shared some great inspiring stories on LinkedIn around, so
Yeah.
what does this mean for the curriculum and the way we teach the next generation, you know, who have more
Yeah.
access
So
to
just
information
just
than anyone?
pause that thought, and then we can give Reginald some extended time if that's okay with Reginald. But Yemi, some just final thoughts from you. How's the experience been for you
Yes.
today?
I have perhaps a slightly longer sort of final thought, and I do have to go because it's my wife's birthday today, and she's probably quite annoyed at me that I've been sat here for 2 hours and not showering her with attention.
Send my
so
apologies. Gifts in the post to her. I promise.
it's fine. But there was something that I've just been burning to sort of try and get across in some of the last bit of the conversation, which is that I think personally, I think we need to redefine our relationship with generative AI and artificial intelligence. I understand that what constitutes as intelligence is a very complex thing to try and kind of, you know, get under the hood at. But at least as far as I've understood, these generative AI models like GPT-4 and such, you know, they're trained on massive amounts of data. They learn patterns, they learn statistical correlations between words and phrases, and they spit that out. Sure, it's not predetermined, but fundamentally that's what the generative part is there. So whilst yes, they can demonstrate a fairly impressive capability that feels human-like, the intelligence is fundamentally, as far as I'm concerned, fundamentally different from human intelligence. It doesn't understand text in the way that humans do. It merely predicts what comes next in a text-based sequence based on patterns that it's learned. Human intelligence is far, far more complex than that. We have contextual understanding. We have conceptual understanding and reasoning. We have adaptability and transfer learning. There are so many other parts to our intelligence that I don't know, I get a bit worried sometimes when we start to potentially over glorify things like GPT. And I think a better way of looking at it, or at least a way that I've started to look at it to reconcile my usage with something like this, is thinking about it, something I read online actually, thinking about it like a plausibility translation engine, right? Plausibility, not absolute truth. Based on that statistical pattern analysis and such, the generative AI is producing plausible outputs, but these aren't always going to be factually correct or logically derived, or you know, they're flawed fundamentally. And this is why I said earlier on in one of my other comments to something someone said, it's augmented intelligence. There is an intelligence that we as human beings are bringing to the table, and we shouldn't forget that. And AI is merely a tool that we can use to augment that, to elevate that, to take that to the next level. It's another reason why I get a bit frustrated when I see people, you know, in my line of work talking about you know, using generative AI to cut costs. That's not the way that we should be looking at this. We should be looking at it as how can we increase productivity and sure, increase revenue and value and such as a result of using this tool. But it shouldn't be oh cool, I can slash 80% of my workforce now because I've got this thing that can basically replace them. It's not replacing us. So sorry, very strong opinion there, but I'm actually going to use that as a mic drop and leave because I really should attend my wife's birthday celebration of some sort. But it's been really, really enjoyable. I think some great conversation here. Yeah, can't wait to watch the recording back and sort of, you know, pick some of the things that I possibly missed out on. So thank you all.
Yeah, huge thanks for all the work you've done to prepare for this and be here today. Huge gratitude.
Cheers.
Thank you so much.
Just on that note, my wife recently said to me, I don't want AI to replace you, Paul. I want it to enhance you.
Sounds like she wants some enhancement, I would say, is a Davisha, some final thoughts for you, and then we'll come to Reginald.
Yeah, no, I've had a really, really lovely time being on this forum, and the discussions were really enriching, I would say. And like Yemi said before he left, that yes, I don't think AI is replacing us. I mean, it's only going to enhance humanity. But again, because of the classic Chinese room argument, I don't think, I mean, and the fact that human intelligence is so much more complex that we cannot yet replicate it in AI. The sort of intelligence we're creating with AI is a lot different. And the only way to really understand it is go through with it, explore and understand. And again, I would also encourage everyone to play around with all of these new generative models. And yeah, if anyone wants to know anything more about my research or anything to do with how to use or what models to use for what purposes, feel free to contact me and I would be happy to help. But I've really enjoyed this discussion. Thank you.
Oh, well, again, thank you so much for all the thought you put into coming to join us today and everything that you've shared. We're honored to be in your company.
Thank you.
Sharing your work a little bit and your thoughts. Thank you. So Paul, you wanted to get into education a little bit there. And they had a question for Reginald. Could you maybe recap the question?
Yeah, so I guess, Reginald, earlier on, we were talking about there are some very traditional classroom models of education that are being usurped by generative AI and other forms of AI and other forms of digital transformation as the model's turned on its head. And I would say that universities, certainly that I'm relating to, and colleges, are in shock. They don't know what's coming in September, but there's already evidence that students are getting AI to write their essays and disguise it well. They have no response to that other than to try and ban it. So I just wondered whether you had some thoughts on what is the kind of positive narrative as generative AI, is selling product. The proprietary companies are all, Microsoft are just upgrading Teams, and lots of universities and colleges are using platforms like that. So it suddenly appears, do they block it? Do they enable it? What do they do next?
I'm just gonna say one last thing before I gotta go. I think there's like people have made new generative models which can help you detect whether someone has used another generative model to write their essays. And I think universities are able to use this to identify whether, whether students are using it. But on this note, I gotta run because someone's been ringing the bell in my house for like a while now, so I'm gonna go open the door. But
who's been on your doorstep for like 20 minutes? That's what
okay,
you probably need the bathroom.
All right. Well,
okay,
thanks,
take care. Reginald, you with us?
Yes, please. I'm with you.
Yeah. Well, all yours, please.
All right. So, my opinion is quite simple. Firstly, we really need to understand what AI is about. I feel because it's not really educated of AI wanting to solve even complex issues that is not generative AI solving complex issues, which is not currently able to solve. You find people praising generative AI as a god of the new revolution, quote unquote. But because people don't really understand the complexity of what AI is about, we need to really define what its road bottom line is about, and the extent it can go. And for the education sector, what Paul was talking about, students, I don't go against the idea of students using generative AI for their assignments, for their texts. I have 60% behind that mode of making things easier, because that's what AI is about. It's about producing intelligent agents to aid in productivity. And if there's one way that can produce and has the productivity of students, I have no issue with it. The issue is how we are handling it.
I was like, no disrespect yourself.
The issue is how we are handling the situation, how we are treating the situation, and as in shunning the idea of using AI as
Reginald, are you still there? Okay, maybe we'll hear back from him in a second. But I've removed the spotlights now, so there's still 50 of us in this room. Now, some people clearly might have just gone and had some tea. Andres, you're still here. Oh, you're going. That was a wave goodbye. But look, this is our time now, for as long as we wish to stay here together. Hey, Alex, see your hands up. So pop the cameras on if you want. Let me know if you want me to. In fact, let's